that man comes up with is ultimately going to be justified by man. And so, therefore, because man is fallible and finite and so forth, every answer or justification given will also be fallible and finite, tentative, even. So you can never really be absolutely certain about anything, ultimately. No, there were a few people I wanted on live. I didn't give any notice. I just came on live. Well, that would be... Well, there are two answers to that, but the broad, again, because my argument's broad, would be, obviously from my point of view, that they haven't been given revelation as to, what on earth happened that created the universe, or, we don't know if there was something before the Big Bang, or if it was always existing, or something of some sort. So there's no objective reference point by which you can justify something. I know I have guests on. I think someone was trying to come on, and I told him he could come on. I'm waiting for him. I mean, HA, you want to come on? I don't want to have people on long, though, because I got so many people. I'm just inundated with, like, hey, man, can I come on? And I'm like, yes, you can, but if I have y'all on for, like, 5 hours, there's no way I'm going to go through all of y'all. Are you a Christian, or... Okay, no worries, bro. Okay, but I'm going to need help here, because I feel like a boomer right now. I got to get this to where it's, like... just me and the other person, but I have no clue how on earth to do that. If someone could help me.
Hey, what's up?
Hey man, I'm so tired. I guess I'll just keep it like this. I don't know how you just get it to two people.
Yeah, I'm just curious, like, what's the justification for the existence of God?
I guess I can just figure it out later. So my argument is, broadly speaking, which worldview can account for or explain why we live in this rational...
That's a question, not an argument.
No, I know.
An argument in the strictly epistemic sense is like a set of premises and a conclusion, where the conclusion's like logically preserved in like the valid sense.
Yeah, I wasn't giving the argument, I was setting it up.
Well, you said the argument is this, which just is like the clause for the inference, and then you just didn't actually provide the inference. But yeah, sure, what's the argument?
Okay, so if you want the argument, I don't like giving it in a syllogistic fashion because transcendental arguments are always accompanied by...
It doesn't have to be a syllogism, just like a deductive argument.
Well, it's not a deductive argument inherently. Transcendental argument's not deductive.
So then by argument, what do you mean?
It's a transcendental argument. And you have deductive, you have inductive, abductive,
yeah, but
and then
what do you mean by argument there?
Well, I mean, where the conclusion still follows from the premises, it's still an argument. It's just not a deductive argument strictly.
But wait, you understand when you talk about abductive and inductive, those are amblytive senses of reasoning where the conclusion doesn't actually follow.
Yeah, I'm not getting into the details. Like, I'm just giving you the broad considerations. You have three distinct arguments traditionally, or however you want to cut the cake.
Well, those are considered inferences, but they're not arguments because in the traditional sense, an argument is strictly logical, where an argument refers to operators of logic and entailment relations, where those aren't present in inductions and abductions. So those are methods of epistemic reasoning that are non-considered argumentative, right? They're types of epistemic warrant for a belief, but they're not actual argumentative justifications. Now, you can formalize certain, like expressions based on probability into like deduction, where you can actually make inductive arguments, deductive, but they're still going to be ampliative.
Yeah,
but so you just don't have the argument?
I'm just telling you that there are different types of arguments throughout the history of philosophy, and transcendental arguments are distinct. We haven't even gotten to the argument because we're going on to tangents now.
Okay, so you don't actually have like a premise, or a series of premises and a conclusion, with the conclusion being God exists?
I do. I mentioned earlier that I don't like giving it only because then comes the vitriol when you're not done. It's not just the argument, because if there's more to it than just laying out a transcendental argument, that's another reason why they're distinct. But I have an argument.
What does that mean?
Formally speaking, and I could put it as a modus ponens, it just makes it easier, but I won't do that. So if for intelligibility to be the case, the Christian worldview must be true because it accounts for intelligibility, and then premise two, and then conclusion. But it's kind of synonymous with the modus ponens.
Okay, I just want to clarify, in the conditional statement there, is it quantifying over, okay, when you say are you saying there exists intelligibility?
I'm saying it's a reality. Like intelligibility is the nature of the reality we live in, as opposed to something like chance or chaos or something like that.
I'm just trying to understand your like claim there. Is it going to be like a conditional that if there's intelligibility, then God exists?
Yeah, but it wouldn't be God exists. Only it's kind of that's too narrow. It'd be like the Christianity is true. The Christian
Okay,
world.
that's fine. Sure, yeah. I just want to clarify in the expression in the conditional there. You're quantifying existentially over intelligibility, right?
I mean, it's a truth existentially, but I'm not quantifying it. Say something like the laws of logic as a distinct entity, if you will, if that's what you're getting at.
I don't even know what that means. I don't even know what you're talking about. Okay, so
Well,
sure, let's just get the argument for the conditional.
Huh?
Yeah, what's the argument for the conditional if there's intelligibility? If there's intelligibility, then the Christian God exists. What's the argument for that?
So on the revelation of God, and remember, you have to stand in the Christian worldview. That's the transcendental argument. Given the nature of the revelation and the existence of God and the actuality of how He's created the universe and us, we can justify the uniformity of nature and consciousness and so forth. And that's half the coin. The other half of the coin is, reject what I'm saying and see where you end up. And A, you end up in skepticism, and B, you are relying on Christianity being true in order to even argue against it.
Okay,
So
there seems like a number of claims being made there that aren't actually. I don't even see. It just seems like a rabbit trail. I just want to clarify. What's the justification for the conditional statement? Like, what's the argument?
Yeah, so Christianity supplies the conditions for intelligible experience. There is intelligible experience. What's the answer? Well, in the Christian worldview, we have the answer to that. And unless one is willing to endorse contradictions, there can only be one true objective reality. And so that would be the direct line, because that's what people are more familiar with, is illustrating it and then showing that there can only be one truth. You can't have multiple realities where
Okay, let's try going like this. The conclusion is the conditional statement, where the conditional is going to be, if there's intelligibility, then the Christian God exists. What's premise one of that?
Premise one of what? The conditional?
For the conclusion, yeah.
I'm not sure what you mean.
What's the argument that justifies the conditional?
Well, I mean, I could put it in this way. If you stand on the Christian worldview, you accept it on its own terms, it justifies every single condition necessary for intelligible experience. And then B is, unless you want to say there's another reality or another existential truth out there that is also true, which contradicts Christianity, then you're just reduced to absurdity. There can only be one objective reality.
Okay, look, what I'm asking for is like premise one of the argument, the conclusion being the conditional. I'm not sure if that was intended to be premise one, but it didn't seem clear. So let's just get, what's premise one?
If intelligibility, then Christianity is true.
That's the conclusion.
That's the major premise. That's
Okay,
the modus.
I'm asking what the argument for the conclusion being the conditional statement, right? So the stage one argument.
So, as I pointed out a while ago, transcendental arguments are distinct. They don't operate singularly. They operate also on a reductio argument. So if I just give you the syllogism, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a claim. They are supplemental.
That just seems like you're saying you can't justify the claim.
Well, I've already illustrated it once, but you lay it out on the Christian's own terms, how we can justify consciousness and etc. and all that.
You understand, but everything, you're just giving these narratives. You understand to be, in order to provide justification, you're supposed to inform the interlocutor with the inference, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Asking what's the argument. So what's premise one?
No, at this point, you reject what I'm saying, and A, you can't make sense out of anything ultimately, monkey boy, and B, you're relying on my mere claims that I'm making. It's an indirect proof that is very unfamiliar in America.
That's just another of claims that you're saying are derivative from the corollary of not being convinced or rationally compelled by the assertion, but that's not actually doing anything to justify the conditional, even if I grant those are true.
How much have you studied transcendental arguments?
But look, that's just like another derail, right? I don't know why you keep trying to go to meta. Just provide the premise one with the conclusion being the conditional.
Well, I mean, this is just a foreshadow, because if we haven't gotten anywhere now, I have to know how much information you already are bringing to the table with the argument I'm wielding. And if you don't know much about transcendental arguments...
You understand the cognizance of your interlocutor is irrelevant to your actual justification for the claim. You can provide the inference, and the inference can be established independent of me knowing anything about transcendental arguments. The point is, you're just not giving me the argument.
No, I mean, I've given you the argument. The syllogism by itself is
insufficient. So then what's premise one?
I've given you the syllogism. The syllogism in itself is valid. The monkey boy is asking, how is it sound?
I'm asking for the stage 1 argument, not the stage 2. I was already clear on the stage 2 argument.
The stage 1 argument is laying out the syllogism, which is inadequate alone.
What do you mean by inadequate?
Okay, so I take it you haven't studied transcendental arguments much. Transcendental arguments
that doesn't answer my question. What do you mean by the phrase inadequate here?
That's correct. Of course, I didn't answer your question at the first statement.
Look, I'm glad you understand your dodging, but that's not what I'm interested in. I just want clarity as to the term use.
Yes, I love when people gaslight. Transcendental arguments are not in the same category for multiple reasons as your historic arguments. They are necessarily supplementive. By themselves, they are inadequate, and I take you didn't know that because you're not following along with what I'm saying. They are supplementive, then they must be with reductio arguments. That's the illustration.
Are you trying to say that it's going to be a prerequisite for certain, like, pedagogies, like logic?
It's a prerequisite for a...
Okay, but that means you would have to be able to deduce it from the axioms of logic, right? And that's exactly what I'm asking. What's the deduction?
Simplify what you're asking for me.
Okay, look, when you say it's a prerequisite, the Christian God is the prerequisite for logic, or what you call transcendental categories, which, by the way, are obviously just like idiosyncratic because that's not how, you know, Kantians use it. But independent of that, if all you mean by transcendental categories are these certain, like, philosophical doctrines, or rather pedagogy, like ethics, logic, epistemology, and stuff like that, when you say it's a prerequisite of any of those, right, let's just say particularly logic, that's to say that you can deduce it from the axioms of logic, right, particularly classical logic in this context. And I just want to get clear, what's the deduction? That's what I've been asking for.
Could you give me an example of what you would expect me to say? Because you see what you're doing is...
okay,
again,
what you're supposed to do is give the conclusion being the Christian God exists, and give me a series of premises that logically entail the conclusion.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I wouldn't give another set of premises for the sake of simplicity. It's unnecessary. The syllogism alone would obviously be sound, or valid. I'm sorry. So how do you prove it's sound?
Validity doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know that. You're bringing up a moot point. I'm saying on paper it's valid, but validity alone doesn't mean anything unless you can prove it's sound. And so to prove it's sound requires the supplementive reductio argument. Instead of giving more premises, it's just one word, which we call illustration.
I think you're confused what a reductio is. A reductio is a type of argument that when faced against an interlocutor's initial position, it actually is intended to repulse the interlocutor from their initial view. Now, I actually haven't put forward a proposition. What I'm doing now is criticizing your argument and actually introspecting us to see what is the actual rationally compelling components, right? What I'm asking for is the argument in light of the claim. And it just seems like you're making a category error when you talk about reductios, because a reductio, even if the reductio were true, that doesn't actually justify the conditional statement. I can grant you there's a reductio. Not only is the reductio in this context, like, contradictory, given that's what a category error is, but it's also not sufficient to actually epistemically warrant the claim that you made from the outset of this, like, discourse. So I just want to get clear. What's the deduction for the conclusion being the conditional statement? If there exists intelligibility, then the Christian God exists. So what's premise one?
Your problem is beyond the premises and the axiom considerations. Again, if I want to go on with this, how much have you read Bonson or Van Til? Oh, but you're dodging. I'm not dodging. I need to get more information from you.
I don't waste time reading, like, nonsense apologism.
Okay, well...
You know, even, like...
Okay, well... Okay, thanks, bro. He's back. I'm so gracious. I've had him back.
Hey, yeah, I'm just, still curious, like, what's the... Well, when I was in the chat, you made the claim that it's impossible that I ground logic. I just want to get clear if you have, like... Because that's, like, a very strong alethic claim, right? Like, a strong modal claim. Do you have, like... Yeah. Presumably, the modality is logical, right? So I'm not sure if you even are sure what a grounding relation is standardly. I just want to get clear. When you say, how do you ground logic, what are you actually asking for?
Right, and this is why I said it's you have to read Van Til and Bonson. He is utilizing Kant's program, but not in a secular way from a Christian perspective. It's if you want to debate transcendental arguments, even from an academic perspective, you don't want to talk about syllogisms first. You can get to that later. You want to just get to how it's demonstrated, how the argument is broadly, and namely that is through illustration. Just illustrate the consequences of either side metaphysically. It's not conceptually, which is a problem with secular transcendental arguments. It's existential, as Grayling says in some encyclopedia. We start
But what do you mean by
existentially.
grounding?
Well, what do you mean by ground? Julie, thank you for the roses. What do you mean by grounding exactly?
Well,
Like my
I don't think the way that I use the vocabulary is really like relevant when I'm not the one like invoking the terms. So I think it's best we clarify what you mean when you invoke that I can't ground logic.
Yeah, I mean, we have to dumb it down again for the sake of this part of the world. It's just via illustration. It's like, okay, lay out what you believe, and let's see if you can account for ABC, all of the transcendentals necessary for the very rationality you possess, because you're smart. So it's just illustrating on your side, and then eventually illustrating on my side, and we compare worldviews. So it's a challenge to you.
So all you mean is like an account for logic when you say ground there?
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you mean by ground, then yeah.
That's by account, you just mean like an explanation.
Yes.
But why would I take it that logic's an explanandum? Or a thing to be explained?
You have to done like what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, why would I take your logic as something to be explained?
You mean that needs an explanation or justification?
Yeah, I take it typically if you actually read like, you know, rudimentary like philosophy of science, what you understand to be an explanation is just the two constitutives of an explanon and explanandum. Now, there's different criterions for an explanandum in philosophy of science, depending on the model theory you're actually using. But under no sense of explanandum in philosophy of science would it actually qualify that logic as a thing to be explained. Now, to be clear, logic is a framework that's axiomatic, so it's grounded on axioms. So it's not going to be explained by anything further,
but right
like
there,
synthetic facts.
What are axioms?
Axioms are analytic postulates that are going to be like analytically contribute to the system.
By whom?
By whoever developed the axioms.
Right there. Whoever develops axioms is who? And it's a man. What is
yeah,
man?
men.
Fallible. Men are finite, so you can never get to these dogma. It's like, why is atheism?
But axioms aren't propositional in the sense they're synthetic. They're analytic, meaning they're non-justificatory. They don't actually.
Their opinion. I mean, that's man-made, is it not?
Wait, what do you mean? That's like saying what I mean by bachelor is unmarried man. There's not like a justification, right? I can tell you what I mean by the word. There's not a justification that a man is, or that a bachelor is an unmarried man.
Okay, all right.
It's true in virtue of definition.
That's okay.
That's what axioms are.
Yeah.
The consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Until is a broad consideration. So, you know, tautologies and so forth. How do you account for the very logic you're utilizing metaphysically ontologically on your position?
Okay, but when you say account there, you just mean explanation. I'm just not clear. Why would I take your logic?
Hey, Joshua,
explained?
let me just make a comment here. I'm quite familiar with monkeyboy. What he is well practiced at is verbal obfuscation. He is going to use all of his verbal skills to obfuscate and dodge. Monkeyboy, are you speaking everything you're saying? Are you speaking out of your worldview? Are you speaking out of your? But if you're not going to answer the questions, then the host is going to kick you from the room. Are you speaking? Are you speaking?
I don't know. You're speaking for the host, but
okay.
Look, no,
listen to me. Listen to me. Joshua's going to kick you out of the room.
We weren't. We were talking about
are
meta
you
logic.
Speaking? You know what? Tell him if he's not going to.
But you keep asking me. I'm trying to answer.
Yeah,
I'm trying
this is his shtick. I'm asking you a simple question.
My
are
shtick.
You speaking? Watch this. Everything that comes out of his mouth is an attempt to obfuscate and dodge. Now, I'm asking you a simple question. Are you speaking to us out of your worldview?
No, I'm not talking about my worldview.
No. No, when you assert what is and cannot be, is that from your worldview or another worldview?
Is it from your standards?
I'm not talking about any particular worldview.
Look, Joshua, I'm going to make a special request of you that if he persists in deliberately dodging these reasonable questions, that you remove him. I know this guy. He has a long history of trolling. You know what? Mute his microphone. Mute his microphone. This guy is well practiced in obfuscating and diversioning tactics. He uploads YouTube videos all the time with clickbait titles like teenagers do. Now, when you speak what is and cannot be, what worldview are you speaking those from?
Well, that's like a loaded question. Right?
No, it's not a loaded question. What is the objection? Listen to me. Hey, listen to me. We're going to have a conversation here, or Joshua's going to kick you out. Now, what is the objectionable premise?
Well, first, it's very clear from no modal system would you actually infer
okay, you see the double talk, Joshua?
Worldviews being
I asked
raised.
you, what is the objectionable premise? You said it was a loaded question.
Wait,
what is the underlying premise?
Okay, look, earlier he gave an argument that was a modus ponens.
Joshua, I'm begging you, remove this guy. You see what he's doing?
Let me keep him on.
What am I doing? Sorry, wait.
I'm asking you a very simple question. When you assert what is and cannot be, what world are you invoking what is and cannot be from?
No, look, okay, so I'm trying to explain that, right? I'm saying that I'm not actually invoking a worldview.
Okay, listen to me. I didn't say if you're invoking a worldview. If you're not speaking out of a worldview, okay, listen, dude, you see what he's doing, Joshua?
You literally said verbatim what worldview you were
listen to me. You see how he keeps on interrupting? So, you should not put up with this behavior. You should not put up with this.
Before you came, he was, he's a smart guy. He's using these terms, and I just simplify it. But I asked him, have you read?
Yeah, Satan is smart too, and he lies.
He hasn't read Van Tiller's, and he called it hogwash or something. So I didn't. I literally said,
Notice. I want you to notice that everything that came out of his mouth when I spoke with him was to dodge, delay.
Can you just drop Darth?
He's just crying.
We're having a productive conversation.
This guy is a very deceptive human being. I've dealt with him before. Okay, I asked him a legitimate question. Okay,
and I gave you a legitimate answer.
If you're not speaking out of a worldview, when you assert what is and cannot be, but it is not contextualized by a worldview, how can it have any meaning at all?
Yeah, monkeyboy, do you reject that everyone has a worldview over logic and stuff, or do you?
Watch, he's not going to answer the question.
Yeah, well, I'm not convinced that it's required for any rational agent that they have a worldview.
Is
it not?
Because
monkeyboy?
No, look, because the way I understand a worldview is just one's conceptual schema, which is just a set of particular
he is just going to keep on yakking.
That the
he is going to dodge until his dying
subscribe. I don't know what you're ever talking.
A little bit, Darth. I just want to see where this goes.
Because I'm going to tell you where it's going to go. I'll leave in a second.
Look, Josh, also not even like a joke to be rude, but Darth has actual psychological narcissism. I'm not even like joking.
Okay, you know what? You're going to tolerate this.
Like, there's literally psychological evidence
you're going to tolerate this
on the internet where he's been psychologically evaluated.
Are you going to tolerate this defamation? Get rid of this guy.
Okay. All right.
Okay, the bottom line is, I am asking him a reasonable question. Because he didn't want to answer the question, he said it's a loaded question. In order for it to be a loaded question, he has to identify the objectionable premise within the question. Otherwise, it's not a loaded question. When he said it's a loaded question, this is a stall, dodge, and delay tactic.
Let's hear him out.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to leave right now, but I'm going to tell you something. This guy,
this
guy purposely dodged and evade. He is a very deceitful and evasive person. When you put the tough, simple, clear questions to him, he is just going to verbally obfuscate with you. It is guaranteed. As the day is long, this is his shtick. He is not an honest person. Look how he responded to my questions. Okay, by total obfuscation and evasion to my reasonable questions. How can you make meaningful predications that are not contextualized by any model of reality?
Right.
Okay, you have no frame of reference.
Right.
By the way, before I go, Joshua, you mentioned the name of a paper. Shut up while I'm talking to Joshua. Shut up while I'm talking to Joshua.
Oh, man.
Joshua, you mentioned a paper. Yeah, by the way, if you're surprised, this guy's a scumbag. He's an absolute scumbag.
Back at you, Darth.
You mentioned, would you mute his microphone, please? Now,
I'm already muted.
You mentioned, okay, would you please mute his microphone? You mentioned the name Adrian something and a paper. Would you do me a favor and would you send me a direct message on TikTok as to the person's name and the paper so I can get a copy of that because I'd like to read that?
Yeah, it's Adrian Barden. I think it was published 5 years after Bahnsen died in 2000. And he's talking about performative transcendental arguments where in the process of doing something, you're contradicting yourself.
Okay. Adrian Barden. What is the name of the paper? You don't have to get it right now. You can send it to me in a DM.
I got my book right here. Bro, I didn't. Oh, it is. It's called Performative Transcendental Arguments.
Is that in the book?
It's quoted in the book. But it's
okay. All right, I'll look it up.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I have a friend named Jack Lindstrike waiting in the guest box. Can you bring him up?
This is what a deceitful
Darth likes to run
this guy is. Okay. Okay, you know what? You are a vile human being, okay? You do this deceitful crap all the time. I'm going to let you go with this guy.
I'm not deceiving anyone.
I let you know. Dude, don't overtalk me, scumbag. I'm going to tell you something. This guy is a devious, lying, evasive scumbag. He couldn't even answer the simplest of questions that I put to him. What does that tell you, right? And then he says it's a loaded question. And I ask you, what is the objectionable premise in order for it to be a loaded question, and you ran away. You are a deceitful human being. I don't let you go, Joshua. Thank you for bringing me on.
Wait, right. Stay on. Jack might want to talk with you. Okay.
I prefer to have... Oh, I was like, no, I'd rather have one person on at a time than multiple.
It's just that Jack and Darth are like best buddies. You can like, there's like an archive of videos on YouTube. You can see how much of buddies they are. But
he's a presuppositionalist, Jack?
No, Jack's just a very philosophically inclined debater. And he's very, very informed with transcendental arguments. I mean, you can talk with him. He has read Bonson, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I mean, no one, even like, you know, academics in philosophy of religion don't even take precept serious. Like, the only academic philosopher I'm aware of is like, that didn't get it from an apologist school was like, I think Deacon Ananias. But like, it's smaller than Thomism. I'm not even sure there's like more than 5 academic philosophers who run TAG.
Yeah, I don't see that as an issue, though. It's like, I don't care, because at the end of the day, it's just analyzing their position, and let's see the consequences, as Van Til would say. What, can you justify ABC?
Well, the idea is, it doesn't actually justify its view. It wants to say that, in virtue of the fact that the interlocutor who has the view that God is not a requirement, then, in them failing to do so, demonstrates only that their position fails, but doesn't actually justify that it's impossible, logically speaking, that in principle atheism does.
So yeah, that's that objection presupposes by the objector that the transcendental analysis is inductive, and obviously it doesn't follow. Like, if monkeyboy's worldview is wrong, therefore I'm right. It's just a non sequitur, but it's not an inductive survey. When we do reductios of a specific type of worldview, it's just a matter of illustration of how you're having to assume the Christian worldview, no matter if you're Buddhist or atheist or whatever. It's not my winning of the argument is not predicated off of the loss of one worldview. I mean, John Warwick Montgomery brought that up. That's not what Van Til says. It's just showing whichever particular worldview we do a reductio with, you're presupposing the Christian worldview in order to argue against it. So it's not an inductive dependent conclusion, which is, I get the criticism. It's commendable for sure, but that's not how the conclusion follows from a transcendental argument.
Yeah, but the issue is that transcendental arguments actually never satisfy their burden by justifying the modal claim.
Why?
Well, yeah, so let me just ask you, how do you justify that it's logically impossible that if one doesn't presuppose God, the Christian God, then intelligibility is ungrounded?
Well, because, you know, the transcendental argument is coming to the table with, I guess you could say, well, no, just to use the historic term, an existential claim. It's not just conceptual in here. And so if it's existentially true, this isn't all an illusion or so forth, and if truth can't contradict itself, we only live in one objective reality, then by default, Christianity is the one true reality, unless someone wants to endorse contradictions.
Wait, but it can be true that Christianity can justify a way of grounding these transcendentals. It doesn't follow if and only if the Christian God exists can we ground the transcendentals. And that's the issue. It wants to go from a conditional to a biconditional. And the biconditional cannot be satisfied by the method that you're using when you actually, maybe you want to say you're doing some like enumerative induction, or you actually do like some Socratic method, or you investigate all these non-God or non-Christian worldviews, and they seem to fail. Never from the generalization can you actually reach the modal, the robust modal claim, and that's the issue.
I just said that.
Yeah, so then I'm wondering, how do you actually justify the biconditional?
Well, okay, to not use philosophical, I don't like using philosophical jargon because it's just not conducive to an audience setting.
If and only if the Christian God exists, is there intelligibility?
Because truth cannot be contradictory unless you hold to a differing view, basically. I mean, if Christianity is true, atheism's not going to be true, or non-theism's not going to be true. God, it's true God exists, and it's also true God doesn't exist. Well, no, it's one or the other. And so if I have the truth, then by definition, it's the truth.
Okay, but that doesn't actually... Okay, it just seems like you're saying if God exists, then the antithesis is false, which is like trivial, right? What I'm not convinced of is that the biconditional claim, if and only if the Christian God exists, then knowledge and intelligibility are accounted for.
Where are you struggling with that specifically? And I can probably help.
Well, the issue is you would have to actually give an argument. Now, I know you said you're not well versed in logic. Maybe it's best I just give you like material on the subject.
So unsure. I never said that one. Or did I ever imply that?
Well, earlier I
Monkeyboy,
asked you what's the set of premises and conclusion, and you said you're not well at developing syllogisms and that you would have to like.
I never implied that. I never said any of that. I mean, see, here we go to being. I guess Darth was right. It's just you're being disingenuous, dude. I'm not going to do this.
That's what I seemed.
Darth was right. It's just you're being disingenuous, dude. I'm not going to do this.
That's what I seem.
Okay, see, the last words he said were, "That's what I seem." Not everything appears as it seems. And monkeyboy, having an IQ presumably of over 150, should know that not everything appears as it seems. Not once have I ever said I'm inadequate in logic. Not once did I ever say I was inadequate in anything else. I asked many times to simplify the philosophical jargon because it's not conducive to an audience setting, and especially to me, who's not understanding everything he's saying. Just kick it down. As soon as he corners you, he hasn't cornered me. I've explained it multiple times. Unless you endorse the position that we live in multiple realities where monkeyboy exists, that is true. And it's also true that he doesn't exist at the same time. Unless you endorse that, there is only one objective reality. My argument is Christianity comes to the table and supplies all of these conditions. Then the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to say, well, those are just claims. You know, that's not an argument. Right there, like Cicino, you explain nothing. Oh, those are just claims. What's the argument? The argument is in denying it. And I've said that. It's indirect. Deny what I'm saying. Josh, you're being dumb. You're stupid. You're just making claims. Okay, great. I'm being dumb, stupid, making claims. I'm coming to the table saying Christianity is true. Reject what I'm saying now. They're all baseless. Where do you end up on your worldview? Two things happen. You're reduced to absurdity, in which case every single time you type on your phone, every single time you type, you're contradicting yourself because you are trying to be rational and you have no worldview to stand on that endorses rationalism. And the second thing is you are having to assume the truth of these claims I'm making in order to argue against them. Well, they're just mere claims. The irony being you're depending on these claims in order to say, oh, it's nonsense. Like cease to know, you're just nonsense. Well, cease to know, you have no basis for consciousness. You have no basis for logic, laws of logic. You have no basis for the uniformity of nature by which you can even type. You don't know in 5 seconds from now everything you type is just going to be jargon or you're going to turn into a frog. That's every single insult I get is a contradiction. Every single one. Unless you're a Christian, you're just not being inconsistent. Unless you are a Christian, every single objection I get is a contradiction. I have a much stronger base than you do. No, we've already done this dance a long time ago. You have no basis for rationality, and here you are trying to be rational. You're contradicting yourself at every point. And when it comes to these mere claims I'm making, again, you are having to assume these mere claims in order to argue against them. That's the proof. You're assuming the very thing you're denying. That's like, cease to know, Darth, I'll have you on. Cease to know. A skeptic comes up to cease to know and says, you know what, cease to know, I don't think you exist. And you look at this dude like he's got mental issues, and he would have mental issues. And you say, what are you talking about? He says, I don't believe you exist. How do you prove it to me? And so cease to know ponders for a minute. How do I prove to this deranged skeptic that I exist? And he says, well, look, you can see me. I literally exist. I mean, you're being dumb. And the skeptic will come back and say, well, yeah, but my senses could deceive me. You know, a good Descartian. That doesn't prove it, cease to know. That doesn't satisfy me. So you're going to have to find another way to prove it to me. How do you prove that you exist? So cease to know puts his hand under his chin. He ponders for a second and he says, you know why, Mr. Skeptic? Because if I didn't exist, you wouldn't even be posing the question. You're contradicting yourself. You're assuming I'm existing in order to even bring up my existence to begin with. You're refuting yourself and proving my existence and even arguing against it. It's so easy to understand. A teenager could get this. I'm not having Jack up. I'm tired. Actually, it's because I'm very scared of Jack. He really scares me. I'm really scared.
All right, thanks for having me back up again. Sorry for that little bit of outburst, but you are unacquainted with some of these people on Discord, like Monkeyboy and Jack Angstreich. They are not what they represent themselves. These are philosophical sophists of the highest order. They glory in being nomenclature and vocabulary spewing machines. And when they are hit with questions that expose the bankruptcy of their position, they will just obfuscate and they will rabbit trail, pretending they're responding to them. They're very well practiced in these deceptive tactics. He is a glaring example. He's a quintessential example, along with Jack Angstreich and other people. Don't be fooled by these people, okay? They will dodge and evade what you put to them, what you put into plain language. They will hide behind a wall of philosophical nomenclature and rhetoric, all the time pretending that they are transparently responding to you when they're not. It's a well-practiced method of deception and deceit. Okay, so you would be unwise to have him or Jack Angstreich back on again. And he talks about Jack Angstreich like he's this upstanding, philosophically informed person. Jack Angstreich is somebody who is engaged in stalking, harassing, sophism, making slanderous claims about people. But be that as it may, you shouldn't have those kind of people up there. Once they make it clear that they're going to hide behind a wall of, philosophy-speak and philosophical nomenclature as a way to divert from your questions, you should just get rid of them right away. You notice how he kept on over-talking me. You'll notice that I asked reasonable questions of him, and he just threw out vocabulary and was not answering my questions. And then he said that when I asked him a legitimate question, right, he says it's a loaded question, when it never was a loaded question. Okay, you know what loaded questions are. It has an objectionable premise within the question. When I asked him to identify the objectionable premise, did he give it, or did he just verbally obfuscate and try to segue away? Okay, this is how deceitful these people are. Okay, that's all I have to say on the matter.
You know, I get the people like Monkeyboy who really use the jargon.
It's a method of deceit.
It is, and it should, for as smart as people like that are. I mean, Monkey's smart. As smart as people are, it's all for nothing if you haven't actually read the sources. So I would like to have.
They think they're fooling people. They're not fooling people. They're just hiding behind nomenclature and vocabulary, which years ago I said that they're hiding behind a wall of words and philosophy, and they're not talking turkey. When you said to him, "I don't want to hear philosophical and jargon here for the benefit of the audience," okay, that limited his ability to obfuscate. He's constantly talking about, what modal logic? When I asked him a direct question, how can you predicate something that's actual and intelligible without it being contextualized by a worldview?